My fingernails dug crescents into my palms as I stared at the two massive rolling suitcases that had somehow claimed dominion over our front hallway. The air was thick with Sandra's cloying perfume, its sickly sweetness curling into my nostrils and twisting my stomach, the same aroma that had stolen my peace on 3 consecutive Sundays. A coat I didn't recognize hung carelessly across my meticulously arranged entryway bench, brushing against the polished wood as if it belonged more than I did. From the living room, Glenn's sports commentary assaulted the space, booming so violently that the picture frames trembled on their hooks, the small family snapshots quivering like trapped birds. "Hope you don't mind," Sandra's voice floated from the kitchen. She emerged wearing my apron, flour dusting the fabric as though she had been nesting there, her smile sharp, plastic, and chilling in its insincerity. "We thought we'd stay a few nights. Glenn's back is acting up again, and it's just easier not to drive back and forth." I remained frozen, keys still clutched like a lifeline, grocery bags beginning to sag and dig into my forearms. A heavy, suffocating sensation rose in my chest, an almost physical tug at something I couldn't name, as if the walls themselves were conspiring to push me out of my own home. Every familiar corner of the apartment, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the faint aroma of lingering coffee, the sun-bleached rug I'd carefully placed near the doorway suddenly felt foreign, invaded. Sandra moved closer, humming under her breath, and I noticed the deliberate way she rearranged a small pile of mail on the counter, as if claiming not just space, but authority. Glenn's laughter echoed from the living room, a hollow sound that grated against my nerves. I tried to inhale, tried to steady my pulse, but my chest tightened, and my fingers, still knotted around the keys, trembled. The apartment, once my sanctuary, now felt like a stage for someone else's story. My eyes darted to the kitchen clock, then to the oversized suitcase brimming with someone else's belongings, and a quiet fury began to coil in me, slow and steady, like smoke curling through a closed room. Every small, invasive movement, the slam of a cabinet door, the scrape of a chair against the hardwood, the faint jingle of Sandra's bracelets added to the sensation that my life, meticulously ordered and carefully guarded, was being smothered under the weight of uninvited occupancy. I shifted my grip on the keys, imagining the sharp sting of metal against palm if I let go abruptly, trying to ground myself. My mind raced with possibilities, each one more impossible than the last, until the oppressive quiet of my own hesitation felt heavier than the suitcases, heavier than the scent that had permeated every inch of my home. Not suddenly, but like a tide that had been swelling imperceptibly over months, the weight of intrusion finally pressed against my chest, pushing my lungs into a shallow rhythm. "A few nights," I said, my voice trembling with the effort to sound casual, brittle as glass. Sandra's eyes glimmered with that infuriating mix of smugness and entitlement. "Just until Wednesday," she added, flicking her hand as if I were an inconsequential insect beneath her notice. Nolan, perched in the living room with a beer in hand, gave a lazy shrug, as though my discomfort were an overreaction, a minor inconvenience easily dismissed. "My name is Olivia. I'm 34, a UX designer, and this is the account of how I gradually reclaimed what was taken from me, my refuge, my home, thread by thread, intrusion by intrusion. For 3 years, I had survived in a cramped apartment where the corner of our bedroom doubled as my workstation. Deadlines collided with household chores, evenings stretched into mornings, and exhaustion had become my default companion. This house, with its sun-soaked breakfast nook that caught the morning light just right, the office I had carved out as my personal sanctuary, and the tiny yoga room I had envisioned for solace and meditation, was supposed to be the tangible reward for our perseverance. A place where calm would outweigh chaos. Nolan had been proud when we stepped across the threshold for the first time. He should have been. His construction firm had poured expertise and obsession into every inch of the structure. Every corner, every tile, every knob reflected hours of scrutiny, as if the house itself were a canvas, and he the artist unwilling to compromise. The initial visits from his parents had been tolerable. His father remarked, stiffly, about the sleek quartz countertops that shimmered under our pendant lighting. His mother critiqued the carefully selected fixtures in our office, her voice lilting with the condescension of a self-proclaimed tastemaker. I swallowed my irritation, choosing patience over conflict, reasoning that occasional visits could be managed with grace. But the pattern shifted, subtly at first, then unmistakably. Every Sunday became a ritual of occupation. "Oh, we're just in the neighborhood," they would explain, glancing at one another conspiratorially. "It's easier if we eat here," Sandra would add, her tone casual but commanding, implying that our home had been designed for their convenience. Cleanup, maintenance, compromise, all expected to bend around their whims. They never asked. They simply arrived, setting their bags down, claiming chairs as if ownership had passed into their hands, and expected hospitality in abundance. Glenn's sports commentary erupted through the living room, each shout and cheer reverberating off walls, shaking our carefully hung artwork. The vibrations made the frames sway like boats in a storm, threatening the delicate balance I had worked so hard to create. The smell of his takeout lingered, a mix of grease and spices, intertwining with the suffocating aroma of Sandra's perfume, a cruel reminder that my sanctuary had become a battlefield. I wandered through the house, heart tight, observing the subtle ways my space had been infiltrated. The yoga mats shifted into corners I had reserved for meditation, my cushions displaced as if marking territories, the little herb garden on the windowsill now flattened by careless footsteps. Each alteration, small on its own, compounded into a silent declaration that my boundaries no longer mattered. And yet, beneath the rising frustration, a quiet determination began to coil inside me, patient and precise. I would reclaim every square inch of this home. One step at a time, one boundary enforced, until the house, once again, breathed only for me. Sandra would linger near the counters, arms folded, eyes narrowed, scrutinizing every motion I made as I chopped, stirred, or measured. "You don't season it with paprika?" she once inquired, tilting her head sharply, her gaze sharp enough to leave invisible scratches along my forearms. I smiled, explaining that I preferred a milder palate, letting the natural flavors shine. Her lips pressed into a thin line, as if my approach were not merely odd but somehow offensive to culinary law. Nolan, meanwhile, never registered my mounting irritation. He leaned casually against the doorway, brushing a hand over Sandra's hair, planting a kiss on her cheek, murmuring that she looked radiant today. Not once did he notice the extra dishes stacked in the sink, the flour dusting the countertops, or the way I was stretching every ounce of energy to feed 5 instead of 2, to clean, to prepare, to anticipate the demands of a workweek looming like a storm. My labor dissolved into the background, invisible beneath the hum of conversation and the clatter of cutlery. The guest room, once envisioned as a serene yoga retreat with sunlight spilling through gauzy curtains, quietly transformed into their personal resting area. Each Sunday, the ritual repeated. Glenn would flop onto the bed with a sigh of relief. "Your sofa aggravates my back," Sandra would declare, her voice syrupy with concern. "This bed is far superior for spinal alignment." My throat tightened. I swallowed, a lump of frustration lodged firmly against my ribs. The thought of voicing my irritation, telling them to stop treating our home as a hotel, felt petty, almost absurd. Yet beneath the polite silence, a slow, unyielding resentment unfurled, knotting my chest so tightly that the mere rumble of tires on our driveway made my stomach clench. One evening, after they had departed, leaving a faint haze of perfume and leftover takeout aromas behind, I approached Nolan with tentative caution. "Maybe next weekend we could keep it quiet. Just the two of us," I murmured, hoping to sound casual, ordinary. He glanced up from his phone, blinking in uncomprehending surprise. "What do you mean?" "I mean it's been relentless," I said, my voice softer now, tinged with fatigue. "A Sunday without commentary on my cooking choices, without rearranging my home for comfort I never intended to offer." He chuckled, leaning back, dismissing the weight of my words with a lazy wave. "They're just trying to help, Liv. You know that, right?" But I could feel the truth in my own body. Every touch, every comment, every casual invasion chipped at the walls I had built around my peace. The aroma of unfinished meals, the displaced cushions, the quiet hum of Glenn's television fading into laughter and commentary, all of it reminded me that my home, painstakingly curated and defended, had been gradually appropriated. I clenched my fists, pressing the invisible barrier of patience a little tighter, aware that tolerance alone would not reclaim what had been lost. Something had begun to stir, quiet but persistent, the certainty that boundaries needed to be drawn, and that my sanctuary, my carefully carved refuge, had to be defended before it vanished entirely. "Come on, you're overthinking it." That phrase echoed in my head more often than I wanted to admit. Overanalyzing, second-guessing, planning every move, it had become my default setting, my invisible uniform. I was the considerate one, the accommodating partner, the one who smoothed edges while quietly swallowing frustration. The following week, determined to try a different tactic, I lingered at the counter while slicing bell peppers, their crisp flesh snapping under the knife. I tried to sound casual, letting the words float as though they were passing thought. Hey, I was thinking maybe my parents could come stay one night next month. Just a weekend. They haven't seen the house yet. Nolan stiffened. His spoon clattered against the side of the pan as he froze mid-stir, eyes narrowing like he'd been blindsided by a lightning strike. Your parents, overnight? Just one night? I smiled, trying to soften the proposal. Yeah. Maybe we could cook something together. Low-key. Nothing formal, nothing stressful. He made a face that twisted disbelief and mild panic together. Liv, no offense, but your dad makes me feel like I'm at a job interview. And your mom? I'd have to be on, you know? I blinked, caught off guard by the phrasing. Be on? Yeah, he said, leaning against the counter, casual in posture but tense in tone, like, polite, careful, measuring what I say, making conversation. The knife slipped from my grip, landing on the cutting board with a sharp clatter that made my teeth clench. My pulse kicked up. You mean, just acting like a decent human being? Don't twist it, he said defensively, crossing his arms. I'm just saying I can't relax around them. They're not easygoing like my parents. In that instant, a chill settled over me, creeping up my spine and into my chest. My comfort, my peace of mind, had been second or perhaps completely absent from his consideration. I carefully measured each word, letting them fall deliberately into the space between us. You do realize, I said, my voice steady despite the tightening in my throat, that I've been hosting your parents every week. Cooking for them, cleaning after them, listening to lectures about towel folding and table settings, while you think you're the one who has to be on for a single night. He offered no reply. His shoulders relaxed slightly, and he returned to stirring the pot as though my words were invisible, meaningless. My hands, still slick with pepper juice, fumbled over the counter. The simmering sauce smelled rich, savory, almost comforting, but it clashed violently with the knot of indignation rising in my chest. A week later, when I returned from errands and saw 2 massive suitcases parked in our hallway, my stomach dropped like a stone. The familiar clang of keys hitting the counter as I entered barely registered. Nolan stood in the kitchen, casually flipping something in a pan, humming to himself, completely unbothered. No acknowledgement of intrusion, no hint of apology, just the calm pretense that everything was perfectly normal. I lingered in the doorway, observing the invasion, the suitcases, the unfamiliar coat draped over the bench, the faint scent of a perfume I hated curling into the air, and the subtle signs that my space had been appropriated without discussion. My hands tightened into fists, a quiet storm gathering inside me. Somewhere beneath the polite acceptance, beneath the habitual accommodation, a spark ignited. A sense that boundaries were no longer optional, that my home, my sanctuary, was worth defending, surged with sudden clarity. The simmering sauce in the pan, the clink of utensils, even the faint hum of the refrigerator all seemed to echo that shift. I would no longer remain invisible in my own home. Something fundamental had changed. It's just a couple days, he said, eyes glued to the glow of his phone, thumbs tapping with rhythmic ease. You know how they are. Besides, it's not a big deal. Not a big deal. The words bounced in my skull like stones in an empty jar, pounding in time with the frantic beat of my heart as I climbed the narrow stairs toward the guest room. Each step felt heavier than the last, weighted by frustration and disbelief. The door creaked open, revealing the room I had once imagined as my private retreat. The bed was in disarray, pillows shoved to one side, blankets tangled as though they'd been tossed carelessly after a hurried nap. Sandra's silk robe hung over the back of the chair, its smooth fabric catching the soft glow of the bedside lamp. Glenn's slippers rested neatly by the threshold, a silent claim on the space that had been mine in thought alone. I inhaled sharply. The faint scent of eucalyptus, which I had carefully chosen to invite calm and clarity, had been replaced by the pungent combination of menthol cream and synthetic aftershave. The air, once comforting, now felt heavy and foreign, intruding into the sanctuary I had envisioned. At dinner, the subtle erosion of boundaries continued. Sandra tilted her head, voice bright but insistent. "Would you mind switching laundry detergents? The lavender one you use irritates Glenn's skin." She smiled, expecting agreement. Glenn chimed in, nodding with the air of someone performing a minor inconvenience rather than acknowledging the intrusion. "And the water pressure in the upstairs shower is a bit rough. Can anything be done about that?" I smiled tightly, the motion almost mechanical. "Sure," I said, voice flat, "I'll add it to my list." My fingers drummed lightly against the edge of the table, a silent protest. My eyes sought Nolan's across the table, searching for acknowledgement, empathy, or even a hint of concern, but he continued eating as though our home had not been invaded, as if nothing had shifted in the past week. After clearing the table, I retreated to my bedroom. Silence enveloped me, but it was not the soothing quiet I had cherished, it was hollow, punctuated by the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft whir of the ceiling fan above. I lay on my side, staring at its slowly spinning blades, imagining the gentle eucalyptus-scented mornings I had once planned. Each rotation seemed like a countdown, a reminder that the life I had meticulously constructed was being quietly dismantled. My mind wandered, cataloguing every small erosion of control, the relocated yoga mats, the commandeered linens, the constant commentary on how I managed my own space. Frustration coiled tight in my chest, an almost physical presence that made it difficult to breathe. I traced the edges of the blankets with my fingers, feeling the contrast between my plans and the reality forced upon me. Sleep was elusive. Thoughts of quiet Sundays, solitary mornings with tea in the sunlit nook, and uninterrupted meditation floated past, each one tinged with sharp longing. Somewhere between frustration and exhaustion, a realization settled into the pit of my stomach. Passive tolerance would not reclaim my home. If I wanted to breathe freely in the space I had nurtured, I would have to assert it. The boundaries I had once allowed to blur needed to be drawn, deliberate and unyielding. Only then could I hope to restore the sense of peace that had once made these walls feel like sanctuary. Their footsteps reverberated through the hall, hollow and deliberate, each step a reminder that my space had been claimed without consent. My head throbbed with the weight of words I couldn't speak, sentences looping endlessly behind my eyes, trapped like birds in a cage. Every muscle in my body ached from suppressing irritation, restraint, and the sharp sting of indignation, muscles fatigued from holding back gestures that would have revealed the depth of my frustration. Nolan's soft, steady snoring beside me was a cruel contrast to the turmoil coiling inside. Between midnight and 2, I lay rigid, staring at the ceiling as the quiet darkness pressed in. The choice crystallized with unnerving clarity: remain a passive observer, a doormat in designer sweatpants, or reclaim authority over the home and life I had built. Slowly, I rolled onto my side, the sheets tangled beneath me. My hand brushed against the nightstand, retrieving my phone. The screen glowed, and my fingers hesitated only a moment before typing. "Rebecca, do you still have that guest room?" Almost immediately, the reply blinked onto the screen. "Always." I didn't have a fully articulated plan, no blueprint for the coming days, but a subtle shift had occurred in my chest. Anger had not yet ignited, but resolve had. Something fundamental had changed. Invisibility would no longer be tolerated. Morning arrived with a muted sunlight filtering through the curtains, but the warmth of the day was lost on me. I moved through the kitchen with deliberate neutrality, making Nolan's coffee exactly as he liked it, extra hot, with a splash of oat milk, and left it silently on the counter. He didn't glance up or notice that I hadn't prepared one for myself. Sandra was already there, draped in my robe as if it were her uniform, and her voice cut through the air. "Olivia, do you have any chamomile tea that isn't so flowery? My stomach's off." I opened the cabinet wordlessly, retrieving the box she indicated, and handed it to her without a smile, without a hint of apology. I pivoted away, leaving her to her rituals. Minutes later, Glenn appeared, dragging his feet in oversized slippers, yawning in a way that filled the kitchen, and immediately powered on the television. Volume 39. The booming commentary bounced off the walls, shaking the small decorative items I had arranged with care, vibrating against the wood of the countertop. Each step I took through the house felt calculated, as though I were negotiating invisible lines, avoiding disruption at all costs. The apartment, once a refuge, now felt claustrophobic. I moved cautiously, tiptoeing around familiar furniture, careful not to bump counters, careful not to speak unless necessary. My own sanctuary had been transformed into foreign terrain, the air thick with uninvited scents, Sandra's perfume, Glenn's aftershave, the lingering aroma of coffee and cereal. Even small gestures, the placement of a chair, the position of a towel, felt like trespasses against my boundaries. I realized for the first time how disorienting it was to occupy your own home and yet feel like an intruder. The familiar rhythm of morning light, the quiet hum of appliances, the soft creak of floorboards, everything now carried an edge of unease. But beneath the tension, a slow, steady determination had begun to pulse. Each silent action, every small moment of observation, felt like laying the groundwork for reclaiming what had been taken. I was no longer merely enduring. I was planning, preparing, and quietly asserting a presence that would not be ignored. For the first time in months, I felt the stirrings of control returning, fragile but undeniable, like the first breath of wind before a storm. By Tuesday evening, Nolan dropped the comment casually, as if it were inconsequential. "They'll stay through the weekend," he said, leaning against the bathroom counter, brushing damp hair from his forehead. "Easier since they're already here. No point making them pack up twice." I froze, staring at my reflection in the mirror, my hands gripping the edge of the sink until my knuckles whitened. 5 days. They had already been here 5 days. The words clanged in my mind like a bell in an empty hall. My throat tightened, but I swallowed, letting a brittle smile mask the storm rising inside. "It's temporary," he added, eyes deliberately fixed on the faucet, avoiding my gaze. Temporary. The term felt absurdly hollow, a polite way of minimizing the invasion that had hollowed out my own home. Later, I retreated to the upstairs office, or what had once been my office. The space was now a chaotic hybrid of leisure and storage, Sandra's baskets overflowing with yarn, fabric, and half-finished DIY projects mingled with Glenn's spare golf clubs leaning against the wall like sentinels. The desk, once neatly organized with sticky notes and prototype sketches, was buried beneath papers and pens that weren't mine. I settled cross-legged on the corner of our bed, balancing my laptop and a stack of reference books, trying to focus on a UX redesign pitch that had to be completed by midnight. Files fanned out around me, some clipped together, others loose and vulnerable, scattered like leaves caught in a draft. Sandra moved nearby, folding laundry with methodical precision, her humming low and persistent, a soundtrack to the tension coiling in my shoulders. Minutes later, the door swung open without warning. Glenn appeared, oversized slippers squeaking against the hardwood. "Where's the HDMI cable?" he asked, voice casual, as though entering my workspace uninvited were perfectly reasonable. I didn't glance up, fingers flying across the keyboard. "Try the drawer in the TV stand," I said, tone clipped, eyes fixed on the screen. When he left, Sandra turned toward me, a question dangling like a casual threat. "Do you always work this late?" I nodded, jaw tight, teeth pressing together. "It's quieter at night." Her gaze lingered a moment too long, eyebrows arching in faux concern. "You should really think about boundaries," she said, fluffing a towel with exaggerated care. "Work-life balance matters." I nearly laughed out loud, the sound strangled in my throat. The irony was unbearable. Boundaries. Work-life balance. Those words were luxuries in my own home, a concept suspended in another world entirely. She had claimed corners of my space, occupied rooms I had designed for quiet reflection, and yet she spoke as if I were overreacting, as if the intrusion were a gentle suggestion rather than an ongoing siege. I felt my chest tighten, heat prickling my temples. The hum of the ceiling fan above, the soft rustle of fabric as she folded towels, the faint clatter of Glenn settling into the living room all amplified my sense of displacement. My own home, the place I had curated for comfort and focus, had become an arena where my presence was secondary, optional, almost invisible. Still, a spark of resolve flickered beneath the irritation, sharp and insistent. I would finish this pitch, meet the deadline, and reclaim control in whatever small ways I could. Every file I organized, every task completed, Every quiet assertion of order felt like a reclaiming of territory. Slowly, deliberately, I began mapping the boundaries I needed to redraw, lines no longer negotiable, a sanctuary slowly taking shape again amidst the chaos. The following morning, Nolan and his parents departed for a late brunch, leaving me behind as if my presence were optional, invisible. I sank onto the edge of the bed, phone in hand, and dialed Rebecca. "You sound like someone who's 5 seconds from torching a throw pillow," she said, her tone a mixture of amusement and concern. "I'm close," I admitted, voice tight. "Come stay here." "It's not that simple," I added, sensing the hesitation in my own words. Rebecca paused, then lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Okay, then make it complicated. Be strategic. You know that's your thing." "Strategic? How?" I asked, curiosity piqued despite the tension knotting my stomach. She outlined a plan that was simultaneously ridiculous and brilliant. "Remember that moving company your brother works for?" she said, a mischievous gleam in her eye. "I think we could arrange something special for your in-laws." I allowed myself the faintest smile, the first in days that didn't feel forced or hollow. Relief and excitement mingled in my chest. "I'll make a call," I said, the words tasting sweet on my tongue. That evening, I approached Nolan carefully, as if navigating a minefield. "My aunt in Portland slipped and broke her wrist," I said, keeping my tone calm. "She has no one nearby. I need to help her for a few days." He barely glanced up from his phone. "Are you driving or flying?" "Driving," I replied. "It's faster." He shrugged, unconcerned. "Drive safe." Sandra and Glenn hovered nearby, their attention focused on logistics as if my departure were a minor household inconvenience rather than a liberation. "Did you pre-make any meals before leaving?" Sandra asked, tilting her head, faux concern dripping from every word. "We don't want to mess up your kitchen system." Her wink made my stomach churn. I packed lightly, one small bag, no drama, no suitcases dominating the hallway. Before stepping out the door, I left a single envelope on my nightstand. Inside was a brief, handwritten note. "I'll be gone for a while. If you need space, now you have it." Signed simply, Olivia. There was no guilt, only a quiet satisfaction as I shut the door behind me. Rebecca opened her apartment door moments later, arms spread slightly as if to envelop me in relief. A bottle of wine balanced in one hand, her eyes sparkling with the shared understanding of someone who had witnessed my slow unraveling. "Finally," her look said, and I felt my shoulders uncoil in response. Her space wasn't vast, but it exuded warmth and calm. Soft light filtered through sheer curtains, bouncing off pale walls and illuminating stacks of books and cozy textiles. I set my laptop on the small guest table, lit a single candle whose flame flickered gently, and sank into a chair. The smell of vanilla and old paper filled the air. For the first time in weeks, I exhaled fully, releasing tension I hadn't realized had lodged in my chest. The quiet was not empty, it was a presence I could finally inhabit without negotiation or apology. For the first time in months, I felt my thoughts stretch outward, uncompressed by scrutiny or intrusion. My shoulders sagged, my jaw loosened, and a fragile but undeniable sense of reclamation began to root itself inside me. The hum of the city outside was distant, softened by walls that weren't claimed by anyone but me. The laptop screen glowed with possibility. Candlelight danced across my notes. For the first time in an eternity, I felt the gentle power of space that was truly my own. Back at the house, my absence seemed to unsettle Nolan more than I expected. The phone rang the next morning, his name flashing across the screen. I let it roll to voicemail, the familiar ping of unanswered calls a small but satisfying rebellion. Moments later, I typed a quick message, "Missed the last train home. I'll stay another day." Then another. And another. Each text was carefully calculated, a quiet assertion of control, an unspoken lesson in boundaries. On the 5th day, perfectly timed according to my plan, a large, white moving truck rumbled down the street and rolled into our driveway, its engine humming a low, authoritative growl. Sandra spotted it first from the living room window, a flicker of curiosity crossing her face. "Oh, they must be delivering something for Olivia," she murmured, her voice tinged with mild intrigue. Two uniformed movers stepped out, their posture professional, boxes stacked on dollies. Each crate was meticulously labeled, Radford and Master Bedroom. Sandra's curiosity hardened into confusion as she approached the front door. "Excuse me," she said, voice sharp with rising suspicion. "What is this?" One of the movers handed her a clipboard, his expression neutral. "Sunrise relocation, We have a work order to move in furniture. Address matches. You're the Radfords?" Glenn stepped forward, brow furrowing. "Yes, that's us," he muttered, uncertainty creeping into his tone. The movers nodded and began maneuvering the items with efficient precision. A full-size mattress teetered on one dolly, followed by polished dressers, a recliner chair with soft leather, and neatly packed boxes labeled cookware and linens. The air inside the house seemed to pulse, thick with the scent of fresh wood polish and cardboard, a subtle perfume of disruption. Glenn's eyes widened, a flicker of disbelief crossing his features. "This must be a mistake," he said, gesturing toward the manifest clutched in the mover's hands. The worker tapped the sheet decisively. "Says here, delivery is for Glenn and Sandra Radford, new residents, 912, Silver Hill Lane." Sandra's mouth opened, then closed again, a silent gasp trapped in the back of her throat. She stumbled backward slightly, fumbling for words as the movers continued unpacking, their efficiency leaving no space for protest. By the time Nolan returned home, the transformation was complete. The guest room, once my refuge, had been meticulously rearranged. A bed now sat flush against the far wall, its linens crisp and untouched, while closets were filled with neatly folded clothing, shoes aligned in perfect rows. Boxes that had once contained my office supplies now held Sandra's sewing materials and Glenn's extra gear. Outside, the mailbox told the story with merciless clarity. Beneath our names, a small sticker had been affixed, reading parents, a quiet, humiliating declaration that the house was now shared and perhaps permanently claimed by the very people who had been intruding for months. Every detail, every shift in furniture and label, reverberated through the home like a silent verdict. My absence had been noted. My space had been overwritten. And yet, somewhere in the chaos, a sense of quiet satisfaction hummed beneath my chest. This was exactly as it was meant to be. For now, the first step in reclaiming control had been executed flawlessly. He walked through the front door, keys jangling in his hand, voice sharp and incredulous. "What the hell is going on?" Sandra's smile was bright, almost triumphant. "Isn't this wonderful? Olivia said we could have this space while she's away," she said, tilting her head in satisfaction, eyes sparkling with mischief. Glenn, lounging in an armchair that hadn't belonged to them yesterday, added casually, "We figured since you're on your own for now, thought we'd make ourselves at home." She even arranged the movers. Thoughtful, right? Nolan's gaze dropped to the envelope still lying on the nightstand, the same one I had left days ago. He picked it up carefully, as if examining it again might reveal some hidden detail, some clue he had previously overlooked. Of course, there was nothing new inside. My handwriting, precise and deliberate, remained unchanged. Rebecca's brother, the one who owned the moving company, had orchestrated the operation flawlessly. He had later confessed that Sandra and Glenn hadn't hesitated for a single moment when they saw their names printed on the work order. Their unquestioning compliance was almost comedic in its efficiency, a testament to the absurdity of their entitlement. Nolan had tried calling me shortly after the move-in. The phone rang and rang, unanswered. A text followed, "Olivia, come on. We need to talk." 3 hours later, I replied, "Can't talk. You're busy hosting. Hope it's going well." Short, simple, and perfectly calibrated. At Rebecca's apartment, the contrast was immediate and almost dizzying. I unpacked a small bag, set my laptop aside, and began preparing dinner in peace. The kitchen smelled faintly of garlic and butter, a comfort that seemed almost luxurious after the constant intrusion of scents from Sandra's perfume and Glenn's cologne in my own home. I moved freely, chopping, stirring, tasting, entirely unobserved. Later, I curled up on the couch with a blanket and a mug of tea, the flicker of the television screen painting the room in soft light. A movie played uninterrupted, its dialogue and music filling the quiet in a way that felt expansive, almost sacred. I didn't have to dodge anyone's voice, ignore footsteps, or shield my thoughts. When sleep finally claimed me, it was deep and unbroken. I awoke naturally at 9, eyelids heavy but unpressured, without the intrusive thrum of a toilet flushing in the hall or someone muttering about water temperature. For the first time in weeks, I stretched fully, savoring the sensation of uninterrupted rest, a small but powerful reclaiming of autonomy. The following morning, a message appeared on my phone from Rebecca's neighbor, a friendly woman who worked at the local real estate office. She relayed the latest updates from our street, snippets of gossip and observation filtered through Sandra's compulsive commentary. They're rearranging the living room again. Glenn insists on hanging the TV higher. I read each note with satisfaction, a quiet grin tugging at my lips. My plan was unfolding exactly as I had intended, every detail lining up perfectly, a small victory that left me both amused and triumphant. For the first time in months, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. Every sound, every movement, every choice was now mine, entirely unshared, entirely free. The taste of solitude was unexpectedly sweet, like wine savored after a long, barren season, and I allowed myself to settle into it fully, knowing the next days would belong solely to me. The first week without me, Nolan tried to convince himself he had everything under control. His texts were short, confident, almost performative. Got it under control. You'll see. 2 days later, a photo appeared, a lasagna half-baked, its cheese barely melted, noodles peeking out unevenly. Chef Nolan in action, the caption read. At first, I smiled faintly, amused by the effort, savoring a small sense of vindication. But by the beginning of the second week, the tone of his messages shifted, unraveling with alarming speed. Do you know where the vacuum bags are? The washer smells weird. Is that normal? Your mom's roast chicken recipe. Where is it? Each ping of the phone made my chest tighten, a quiet thrill of satisfaction mixing with the strange pang of watching him flounder. I ignored them all. Rebecca, perched on her balcony with a cup of steaming tea, noticed the messages flashing across my screen. Amazing, isn't it? She said with a chuckle. How fast it's not a big deal turns into help me. I'm drowning. I nodded, letting a small, private smile tug at my lips. Meanwhile, Sandra had been calling with relentless persistence, her number etched in my phone from months of Sunday dinner coordination and reminders. Finally, I answered. Olivia, sweetheart, she cooed, voice syrupy and invasive, are you planning to come back anytime soon? Why? I asked evenly, feigning curiosity. You've got the whole house, she said, tone deliberately sweet. Well, it's just Glenn and I were under the impression this was temporary. So was I. She paused, lowering her voice conspiratorially. Nolan seems stressed. He misses you. I didn't answer. I let the line of truth linger in silence. Nolan was finally living the experience I had endured for months. The constant noise, the never-ending directives, the way personal space evaporated, and the incessant questions became his reality. 3 days later, another text. I'm sorry. This is hard. I didn't realize how much you were juggling. Relief that he understood even partially bubbled under the surface, but it was immediately tempered by the next line. Still, they're my parents. I can't kick them out. That sentence carried the weight of entitlement, stubbornness, and immovable inertia all at once. It said everything I needed to know. So I acted. Calmly, deliberately, I drafted a separation agreement with Rebecca's lawyer friend, a clear, legally framed boundary, a line drawn in digital ink. Not divorce, not yet, but unmistakable, a structure to reclaim control, a reminder that my autonomy was not optional. Rebecca scanned and emailed the document to both Nolan's personal and work accounts, ensuring he could not claim ignorance. My mind replayed the details I'd relied on for security. I had contributed the majority of the down payment, and while the mortgage listed both of us, the land title remained under my name alone. Nolan had once insisted I didn't need to be on every document, that it was all ours anyway. Now, that insistence became a weapon in my favor, a concrete lever to assert authority in a home that had so long been contested. I exhaled slowly, a surge of calm threading through the adrenaline in my veins. For the first time, I felt not just relief but empowerment, a precise, unshakable sense that my space, my investment, and my life were mine to protect. Every text, every phone call, every complaint that had once swallowed my days now fed into the strategy one had constructed. The house, my home, was no longer just walls and furniture, it was a symbol, and I intended to take full control of it. Our separation agreement had been meticulously drafted, clauses and contingencies laid out to anticipate exactly this kind of scenario. Every phrase was intentional, every word a safeguard. I hadn't imagined needing it so soon, but the moment arrived faster than I anticipated. The phone rang early the next morning. I answered with measured calm, expecting the storm. "Olivia, what is this?" Nolan's voice was sharp, panicked, trembling beneath its edge. "A boundary in writing," I said evenly. "I'm really doing this. Over a couple of weekends." His laugh was hollow, incredulous. "It's never just a couple of weekends, and you know it," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. Silence stretched after that, thick and tense, punctuated only by the faint hum of the refrigerator behind me. Finally, he admitted, almost in a whisper, "I can't afford this place on my own." "I know," I said simply. No relief, no gloating, just a statement of fact. A shaky breath. "Are you asking me to move out?" "No," I replied. "I'm just saying, if they're staying, I'm not." What followed were 2 grueling weeks of attempts at subtle sabotage. He tried to coerce his mother into preparing meals. She refused, citing an imaginary aversion to handling my kitchenware. He asked his father to fix the broken dishwasher. The request went unheeded. Sandra claimed she didn't want to touch my laundry, leaving piles of clothes to fester. Glenn, meanwhile, transformed the kitchen into a chaotic shrine of neglect, stacking takeout containers in the sink as if to assert dominance over space I had curated. Nolan's coping mechanism emerged slowly, painfully obvious. He began eating out obsessively. Fast food first, then microwave dinners that he barely warmed through, an aroma of convenience masking desperation. My messages went unopened, notifications accumulating in silence, ignored like unattended mail. Then came the financial misstep that pushed me past patience. Our joint account had been overdrafted. I froze the card with deliberate precision, a small digital act of authority. When Nolan called, fury rattling through every syllable, I answered with composed neutrality. "You're not entitled to funds I'm not using," I said, each word deliberate, steady. "We're separated. You've already been notified. I moved my direct deposit. You should do the same." He cursed under his breath, a low, frustrated growl. And then he said it, the line I had been bracing for, the one I knew was inevitable: "Maybe we should sell the house." "That's up to you," I replied, my tone neutral, almost detached. "But if you do, I get first right of refusal. It's in the paperwork." "So what? You want it back now?" "No," I said. "I just want the option. You've already filled it with your chosen residence." The line went silent, only the faint click of the call ending resonating. A week later, my inbox pinged with a notification. The house had been listed online. The message glowed on my screen, stark and impersonal. I stared at it, the familiar layout of the listing on a real estate website, photos showing my carefully chosen paint colors, my furniture arrangements, my home, suddenly presented as a commodity. And yet, underneath the shock, there was a quiet thrill. I had drawn the line. I had forced clarity. The chaos was no longer ambiguous. My control, hard-won and deliberate, had manifested in black and white terms, waiting to be acted upon. I had set up alerts for our former address on several real estate websites while staying at Rebecca's apartment, anticipating that this moment might come. The notification pinged softly on my phone, and I clicked the link with deliberate curiosity. The listing was both tragic and absurd. The living room was a chaotic sprawl, mismatched chairs leaned against the walls, old magazines fanned across the coffee table, and Glenn's bulky foot massager occupied a corner like an uninvited sculpture. The kitchen, which had once gleamed with polished countertops and gleaming appliances, was now plastered with sticky notes taped to every drawer and cabinet: "Do not touch." A pile of laundry, some folded haphazardly, some not at all, dominated the guest bed in a chaotic heap. It was simultaneously heartbreaking and hilarious. I exhaled, a mix of disbelief and quiet amusement, and Rebecca leaned over my shoulder, laughing softly. "That looks like a Craigslist bachelor flat with parental chaperones," she said, gesturing at the cluttered chaos on the screen. I shook my head, remembering the tiny details of that space I had once adored. The bathroom, where I had carefully lit candles to create a soft, relaxing glow, now felt like someone else's distant memory. Eventually, Nolan sold the house, and unsurprisingly, below market value. The agent's comment read, "Motivated seller, flexible timeline, minor repairs needed." The property changed hands in less than a month, a record speed for our neighborhood. I didn't buy it back. I didn't need to. I had already discovered a new sanctuary, a modest rental townhouse tucked into a quiet street. Nothing ostentatious, but it had features I had longed for: an open balcony where morning sun streamed in, a deep soaking tub, and the most important luxury of all, no one entering uninvited. Life there unfolded slowly, deliberately, with a rhythm I controlled. I worked on my projects without interruption, slept without sudden footsteps in the hallway, and visited my parents on my own schedule. I hosted brunches for friends, laughter spilling across the apartment, clinking plates and the aroma of baked pastries filling the air. Laundry was my own concern, folded neatly or left rumpled at my whim. My routines were undisturbed. My home, for the first time in years, felt like mine again. 6 months later, I ran into a mutual friend at a sunlit cafe downtown. She hesitated at first, squinting in recognition. "You look glowier," she said, smiling, tilting her head slightly. I returned her smile, the warmth in my chest quietly triumphant. "How's Nolan?" I asked casually, curiosity tempered by distance. She gave a small shrug, her tone subdued. "Living with his parents for now, it's a lot." I nodded, quietly satisfied. It always was, I thought. Back at Rebecca's apartment, where I was helping her pack for her own upcoming move, we finally raised our glasses. Clinking crystal against crystal, the sound was crisp and satisfying, a small symphony for our liberation. We toasted to peace, to boundaries, and to spaces that belonged only to us, filled with laughter, warmth, and autonomy, the simple joys of control regained. She looked at me, her eyes curious, gentle, searching. "Do you regret anything?" she asked, her voice soft but earnest. I paused, letting the question hang in the air like sunlight filtering through sheer curtains. I thought of every exhausting Sunday, every unsolicited critique, the constant feeling of walking on eggshells in my own home. Slowly, I said, "I regret not leaving sooner." Her lips curved into a knowing smile, a mix of sympathy and quiet admiration. "Want me to help you draft the divorce filing?" she asked, teasing lightly, but I could hear the underlying seriousness in her tone. "Already done," I said, a small, triumphant laugh escaping. "The papers were signed last week and filed with the county. It's finally over." We raised our glasses, the delicate chime echoing softly in the quiet room. The house was gone, sold and moved on. The weight, the oppressive heaviness that had clung to my chest for months, was gone too. I hadn't just left a building, I had walked out of a long-standing pattern, a cycle of intrusion and compromise that had eroded my sense of self. Months later, a message appeared on my phone from Sandra, tentative, almost pleading. "Could we meet for coffee? Just talk." I stared at it for a moment, a faint smirk tugging at the corners of my mouth. Then, deliberately, I deleted it without listening to the rest. Sometimes, I realized, peace looks like absence. Sometimes it sounds like silence, a calm that stretches across empty rooms and uncluttered counters. Sometimes, it feels like waking up alone in your own home, sunlight spilling across the floor, the faint scent of brewed coffee drifting from the kitchen, and truly breathing for the first time in months. Breathing without restraint, without obligation, without someone else's presence intruding on your chest. I sank back into the couch, letting the quiet settle around me like a soft blanket. My fingers traced the rim of my glass, the warmth from the tea seeping into my palms. Outside, the morning light shifted, golden and forgiving, painting everything in soft clarity. For the first time in years, my choices were entirely my own. And as a little bonus for anyone who's stuck with me through this story, here's something practical. If you love learning, growing, and immersing yourself in new ideas like I do, you should definitely try audiobooks. I have an exclusive deal with Audible. Your first month is completely free, giving you access to over 500,000 titles with zero cost. It's a simple way to expand your world while still sipping your coffee in peace. The full details are waiting in the description. Don't miss this opportunity to feed your curiosity and take a little time for yourself. My fingernails dug crescents into my palms as I stared at the two massive rolling suitcases blocking our front hallway. The scent of Sandra's overpowering perfume clung to the air, a sticky reminder of her presence. A coat I didn't recognize slouched over the entryway bench, and the low hum of Glenn's sports commentary vibrated through the walls, rattling picture frames and my patience. "Hope you don't mind," Sandra said from the kitchen, her smile sharp and rehearsed. "We thought we'd stay a few nights. Glenn's back is acting up again, and it's easier not to drive back and forth." Frozen, I clutched the keys in my hand, grocery bags heavy at my side. Something precious was being stripped from me, slowly, like water eroding stone. My voice caught, "A few nights?" But Sandra waved me off, dismissive. Nolan didn't see it. He was already smiling, oblivious, proud of how accommodating he could be. The intrusion wasn't sudden, it had been a rising tide for months. At first, I tried gentle requests, subtle attempts to reclaim space. I suggested my parents could visit one weekend. Nolan's face fell as if I'd proposed a crime. I reminded him, carefully, that I had been hosting his parents weekly, cooking, cleaning, and maintaining my own schedule. He shrugged, a shrug heavier than it looked, indifferent to the imbalance. Every Sunday, the house transformed under their occupation. Sandra hovered in the kitchen, questioning every choice I made. "You don't use garlic powder?" she asked, as if my methods were criminal. Glenn's presence loomed, slouched on couches that no longer felt mine, controlling the volume of televisions like a general commanding his troops. Even the guest room, once my intended yoga space, became a nap station, complete with his back-supporting pillow and sheets arranged exactly how they liked. One night, after they had left, I suggested gently to Nolan, maybe next weekend could be just us? His confusion was almost comical. "What do you mean?" he asked. I wanted to scream. The role I had played for so long, the accommodating, considerate, ever-cautious one, had become a prison. I realized subtlety wasn't working. I tried a different approach, casually mentioning my parents' visit, low-key and unobtrusive. Nolan recoiled. Being on around them, he explained, was exhausting, as if hosting, cleaning, and seeding your home for months didn't count as labor. My knife clattered against the cutting board, frustration sharp and biting. Every attempt to assert normalcy for myself was met with disbelief, indifference, or outright annoyance. Then came the moment that shifted everything. I left, a simple explanation about a distant relative needing help, and moved into Rebecca's apartment. No suitcases, no dramatics, just a small bag and a sense of anticipation. Before leaving, I left a note on the nightstand: "I'll be gone for a while. If you need space, now you have it." At Rebecca's, I experienced silence the way you discover a long-lost treasure. I cooked without commentary, curled up on a couch that was mine, slept until 9, and watched the world unfold at my pace. Updates from neighbors trickled in, amusing anecdotes about how Glenn and Sandra were navigating or failing to navigate the space I had once occupied. When the moving company arrived days later, orchestrated by Rebecca's brother as part of a careful plan, chaos erupted in my absence. Sandra and Glenn moved in fully, rearranging closets, stacking furniture, claiming space that had never belonged to them. Nolan returned home to find the guest room transformed, the mailbox relabeled, and the boundaries I had drawn, invisible in my presence, now glaringly enforced. Weeks passed, and the reality of my absence sank in. Nolan tried, faltered, ignored messages, mismanaged finances, and even overdrew our joint account. I froze the card and calmly enforced boundaries, moving my direct deposit and reminding him that our separation wasn't a suggestion. He suggested selling the house. I reminded him I had first right of refusal, a detail anchored in the paperwork I had drafted. Eventually, the house was sold below market value, a chaotic tableau of their choices frozen in online photographs, cluttered living rooms, sticky notes on every cabinet, laundry piled across beds. I didn't buy it back. I didn't need to. I had found my own space, a small townhouse with a balcony, a deep tub, and quiet mornings uninterrupted by intrusion. Life returned to a rhythm I controlled. I cooked, hosted friends, slept, and lived without interference. Months later, a friend remarked that I looked different, glowier, lighter, freer. I smiled and asked after Nolan, learning that he was still under the same pressures I had endured. A quiet satisfaction settled over me. Back at Rebecca's, helping her pack for a move of her own, we toasted quietly to peace. Glasses clinked, the sound resonating like a personal victory. The house was gone, the weight lifted. I hadn't just left a building, I had walked out of a cycle of compromise and intrusion, finally claiming the life that had always been mine. Sometimes, peace isn't loud. Sometimes it doesn't look dramatic. Sometimes, it arrives in absence, in the gentle rhythm of your own breathing, in the quiet autonomy of a space you control, where your choices are yours alone. The townhouse was smaller than the house I'd left behind, but every inch felt mine. Sunlight spilled through the windows in the morning, warming the hardwood floors and lighting up the little balcony I could finally call my own. I often lingered there with a mug of coffee, letting the city hum beneath me without demanding anything in return. The air smelled faintly of rain one morning, crisp and clean, a stark contrast to the lingering sense of someone else's choice in candles, detergent, and perfume I had endured before. I set up my laptop on the corner of the dining table and worked in peace, stretching when my shoulders tensed, the sound of traffic outside now an ambient melody rather than a stressor. I noticed the quiet, the absence of constant commentary and unsolicited advice, and reveled in it. The solitude wasn't lonely, it was restorative. I could organize my day by whim, linger over emails, take an afternoon nap, or leave for errands without anyone expecting a running commentary on my every action. Cooking became a meditation. I chopped vegetables with no one hovering, stirred sauces at my own pace, and sampled dishes freely. One evening, I roasted a chicken with rosemary and thyme, the aroma filling the apartment, and for the first time in months, I felt a small glow of pride that wasn't undercut by critique. I baked a simple loaf of bread and left it cooling on the counter, noticing the soft crackle as the crust set. These small acts, simple and unobserved, became rituals of reclamation. Evenings were the sweetest. I curled up on the sofa with a blanket, headphones in, losing myself in podcasts or novels without glancing over my shoulder. There was a calmness to my breathing, a rhythm that matched no one's schedule but my own. Occasionally, I paused to watch the light shift across the room, the golden hue of sunset painting the walls in warmth I had not realized I had been craving. Weekends were unhurried. I invited friends over for brunch, setting the table with mismatched china I actually liked, the kind of aesthetic I had longed to express freely. Laughter filled the apartment as we cooked together, shared stories, and lingered over coffee. I folded my own laundry at a leisurely pace, folding towels the way I liked, organizing my wardrobe to my satisfaction, each movement a small declaration of autonomy. On one morning 6 months after leaving the house, I ventured to a quiet cafe for breakfast. The smell of freshly ground coffee and baked pastries mingled with the distant hum of conversation. A mutual friend arrived, and she blinked at me, astonished. "You look different. Lighter, happier," she said. I smiled, feeling the warmth of truth in her observation. "And Nolan?" I asked cautiously. She shrugged, her gaze distant. "His, still managing with his parents. It's a lot for him." I nodded, a faint smile tugging at my lips. It always was. Back at Rebecca's apartment, helping her pack for her own move, we celebrated quietly. Boxes lined the walls, filled with clothes, books, and memories, yet our spirits felt unburdened. We raised our glasses to solitude, to boundaries, and to the little victories that no one else would see but us. The clink of glass echoed like a promise. We would no longer surrender our spaces, our routines, or our peace. Some nights, I sat on the balcony, letting the city lights blur into golden streaks in the distance. I listened to the wind rustle through the potted plants, sipped wine, and marveled at the fact that for the first time in years, I controlled the rhythm of my own life. Every decision, every small indulgence, every moment of quiet joy was mine to orchestrate. The intrusion of others, the endless compromises, and the constant exhaustion of pleasing someone else were finally behind me. Sometimes peace wasn't dramatic. It didn't arrive with fireworks or confrontation. It arrived in the faint scent of baking bread, the warm glow of sunlight on a table, the quiet laughter of friends, and the deep, uninterrupted inhale of air that was finally mine. Every day became a small celebration of autonomy, a reminder that the life I had carved out, simple, deliberate, and full of intention, was a home for my body, mind, and spirit. And in that calm, I realized something profound. Freedom wasn't about grandeur or possession. It was about control over the small, ordinary details that make life yours. Folding my laundry. Brewing a perfect cup of tea. Choosing who entered my world. Letting my thoughts roam without interruption. This was victory. This was reclamation. This was peace.